Hey, this is Mike Callahan here, and today I want to make a simple slot machine. This is a follow-up to my recent video on creating my very first Stencil web component. In that video, I added the component to an existing Ionic app, but I really glossed over how that happens. Today I'm going to go through the steps necessary to take an existing stenciljs web component and create a working mobile app from scratch with the Ionic Framework that uses 3 instances of that component. Let's start with the web component. I created it a few weeks ago to see how I could get CSS 3D animation working with Stencil. My goal was to create a component I could use multiple times on a page without the component needing to know or care what the images are that it's animating or how many of them there are. All that's determined dynamically. I'm not going to go through that code here at all. Here's a public GitHub repo if you want to check that out for yourself. The important things for me to show is how to modify the existing stenciljs component from the starter template so that I can build and deploy it into my Ionic app. These 3 options are reasonably self-explanatory. In order to avoid naming collisions with your web components, you'll want to specify a namespace that no one else is likely to use. I chose WR-slot3D. The next line tells the Stencil compiler to build a distribution package. The last line tells it to continue generating a www folder. I found that if I didn't do that, I could no longer run a local version for development purposes. Over in package.json, we have a little more work to do, but it's pretty straightforward. The first 4 lines are just me changing the stencil template values into something specific for my project. The next 4 values, main, types, collection, and files, are specific to the distribution, but should never change. You can simply set them to these exact values. The last one, browser, is the main entry point of your component and will vary depending on the name of your component. In my case, it's wr-slot3d.js at the top of the dist folder. For more details, you can take a look at the documentation here. Once we've modified those 2 files, we can build a deployment package, which will then copy into the Ionic app. We do that with a simple npm run build. Now I can create a blank mobile app with the Ionic start command. Opening the home page, I'll add a grid with 3 columns and 1 row for the slot machine elements. We'll fill in the custom elements later. Next, I'll add a full width button to the main page that simply says spin. We'll need a place to store the built elements that Stencil generated for us, so I'll create a new directory called Web Components in the root directory of my Ionic project. Next, I'll copy the entire Stencil dist folder into Web Components, renaming dist in the meantime to something more meaningful, like WR-slot3D. I also have some images in my Stencil demo project that I'll want to use. They can be any type of image, but in this case, there's some pics of the digits 0 through 9. The next thing I have to do is to tell Ionic build process to copy the web components folder whenever it builds. There are a couple ways to do this, but this one seems the most straightforward and least likely to break in the future. In my package.json file, I'll add a custom config section that the Ionic CLI will read during builds. I'm going to tell it to use a custom copy script instead of its default. That means that I need to create that custom copy script and its scripts directory. The script itself is pretty simple. First, I copy the existing default copy instructions by requiring it from the Ionic app scripts copy config file. This should help guard against minor changes to the default config in the future. As long as its location and format stay the same, this should work fine. Then I add my own section to it to tell it to copy the web components folder from the root folder to the www destination. In order for Angular to understand that we're going to have custom elements, we need to add the following code to our app module, specifically the custom element schema to the schemas array, which also requires importing that custom element schema identifier into the file, which Visual Studio Code does for me. Now back in the home view, I'm going to add 3 identical slot components, 1 in each column. The slot 1, 2, and 3 attributes are so we can use viewChild inside the component to reference them, which I'll do now. This is all of the component code needed to make it work. The viewChild decorators let me reference the elements as variables in my component. I could have also used getElementById, but this lets me do it in a slightly more declarative manner. One thing I don't like about this approach is that my slot variables are weakly typed. If you look at the typings file generated by Stencil, the implication is that I can get a strongly typed WR-slot3D element with code completion and everything. However, I couldn't get it to work, so I punted and did this instead. I still wrestled with it for a while, but once I realized I had to get a reference to the native element, all was well. There's one last piece of the puzzle we need to fit into place. Inside of index.html, we need to include the web component's source file. Remember that we automatically copied the web components folder, but the app still needs to know about the script it contains. This would be a good place to introduce another automated build step, but for now I'll just use a script tag. Now let's fire it up and see how it looks. As you can see, all 3 slot elements rendered as expected, and clicking the spin button causes the animations to start just like a real slot machine. I plan to use this component again when I rewrite my Mario Kart 8 app as a progressive web app. Subscribe to the videos here or check back for when that's done. In the meantime, please feel free to check out my latest Pluralsight course on using Ionic with Electron to create desktop apps for Mac and Windows. And please follow me on Twitter @WalkingRiver. This is Mike Callahan. Thanks for watching.